short talk today on some work we've been doing over the past 3 years on the new blush pear varieties that have been developed in conjunction with ourselves and the Australian National Pear Breeding Program. The three that we've looked at as far as storage and harvest, when to harvest them, are the ones up there on the screen, which is AMP 0118, AMP 0131 are the main two. These two have been released. And another very promising variety that doesn't have a name yet, that we just call 0534. And here's some shots of these three varieties on the field lab that you'll be going to after this talk. Now, those of you who know a little bit about blush pears will know that other blush pears that are out on the market have a couple of problems, and these are what they are. They don't ripen on the tree, and because the blush and the colour is set quite early, you can't rely on colour to determine when to harvest. So how do you harvest? And what indicators do you use to decide when to pick? The next problem is that some of the other blush varieties, when they don't ripen on the tree and they don't ripen after harvest unless you cool them, and that means putting them in a temperature less than, say, 1 degree. And how long do you need to do it until they're fully ripe? In other words, that they reach maximum sweetness. Forel, which is a relative of these three, needs 10 to 12 weeks at 0.5 to get rid of this mealiness problem that it has. So is this a problem with these three new varieties? Another problem that may crop up is scald. Are they susceptible to this post-harvest problem? So they were the aims of what we were trying to do. Now, specifically with regard to when you decide to harvest them, we wanted to see if we could use the DA meter to correlate that with firmness, because we still believe firmness is the primary indicator to decide when to harvest pears. But with the DA meter, could it be used as another non-destructive tool, if you like, to decide when it's time to pick? So we did a series of trials from 4 to 6 weeks leading up to harvest time, where we correlated firmness with the DA readings. For the storage trials, we also did 3 harvests of the fruit to find out, was there any difference between whether you pick early, normal or late, and the difference was 7 days. So we picked 7 days before what we would term normal commercial harvest, which again was primarily determined by firmness. 7 days before normal and 7 days after. How did those 3 harvests perform in cool storage? Now, just a little bit about the DA meter. We've used this extensively in stone fruit and apple. It's also been used overseas. It was developed in Italy, and basically what it is it detects chlorophyll A content in the skin, and it correlates that with ethylene production. And if you get sufficient ethylene production, you can segregate the fruit into what's called a maturity stage. So you get a pre-climacteric, climacteric, in other words when ethylene is first produced, and post-climacteric. With stone fruit, and I know I've done quite a bit of work with yellow nectarines, it works beautifully. But it is related to the time course of ethylene, and this is some work that I did with John Lopresti, looking at the correlation. I'm wondering if I can get... Anyway, the IAD value is along the bottom. The higher the value, the less ripe the fruit, the greener the fruit. And ethylene is running up and down. And the arrows, the one on your left, is when harvest is normally carried out. So you get these 3 stages, which is overripe, which is correlated to 0.3, 0.4 on IAD, ripe 0.5, 0.6, and underripe, which is 0.7 and above. Now, that would be very good if pears produced ethylene, but unfortunately we didn't find it, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a little while. What we did as far as storage goes is we looked at the literature to find out how other blush pears are stored. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel and go through the whole process of working out what's the ideal CA atmosphere, what's the ideal storage temperature, because they've been sorted out. So we stuck to storing them at minus 0.5 plus or minus around about 1 degree. So minus 0.5 to plus 0.5. We stored them in air and CA. The CA atmospheres was 1.5, 1.5. We had a look at the effective storage time over up to about 7 or 8 months on the fruit quality. So did they develop scald? What changes did we see in firmness, sweetness, shelf life and rots? Excuse me. In order to develop protocols to ensure that the fruit will reach whatever market they're aimed at a stage identified in consumer studies, and the Asian consumer studies, Bruce Tompkins will talk about them in November. Now these are the trials that we did. We stored 0118 Lanya twice, this year and 2 years ago, up to 7 months. We stored 0131 Deliza twice, up to 8 months. We actually went up to 10 months in 2015. 0534 we stored last year. And this is what we found. First of all, when we're looking at the best time to harvest Lanya, we did not find ethylene, whether before or after harvest. So you can't use the DA meter to set harvest classes. There is, however, a strong correlation between firmness and the DA reading. So you can use the DA meter as a guide. And we found that the ideal harvest maturity based on the fruit quality after storage was when you get a DA reading between 1.2 and 1, and that correlated to between about 4.5, 4.6 to 4.3. And we found that the best time to harvest Lanya was about the same time as WBC. In other words, first week of January to early Feb. It really depended on the season. One season we started harvesting on the 28th of December because it was particularly early. This year it was late. So it's all, as you know, about reading how the season's going. Now here's some results from storage trials. You'll see on the bottom we stored Lanya up to 28 weeks. This is basically just looking at, was there any difference between CA and air on firmness? And you'll see firmness declined in both CA and air, a little bit more in air, but from a statistical point of view there's really no difference. Now because I've got so much data and I didn't want to completely bamboozle you, this data that I'm showing you is what the fruit were measured directly after they came out of storage. We also measured them 7 days after storage, but I didn't want to confuse you with all that. But what we're finding is that the CA, even though you don't see a benefit of fruit immediately after they come out, 7 days down the track, after 7 days at 18 degrees, the CA fruit are much firmer and they're a better quality fruit. This is the effect of the 3 harvest times on firmness during storage. And you'll see, as you'd expect, the firmness of the early harvested fruit was quite a bit higher than mid and late. They all declined, but the decline was more in early harvested fruit. So I guess my advice is that I would not go early as far as firmness is concerned, particularly as these fruit are due to be marketed as a crisp pear, and you don't want the firmness to drop too low, otherwise they get mealy. Now this is the interesting thing about these pears, and it reflects back on what I said before about Forel and why Forel is stored for 10 to 12 weeks before it's marketed. As we found in CA that there was a distinct rise in sugar, and it peaked at 16 weeks. And we found this over 3 seasons. We've also found it, as you'll see, in other varieties. So The thing about that we found about 0118, first of all, if you look at the bricks, if you can read it, we're getting up over 16. And I've measured fruit that have hit bricks of 18, 19, 20. They're very, very sweet. And it's one of the reasons I believe this particular variety, Lanya, is very popular in Asia because it's low acid, very high sugar. It's too sweet for me. I couldn't eat it. It's like eating a chubba chub. But for those people that like that kind of sweetness, it is a very good pear. So you see, in this particular slide is a good reason why I think CA is preferable over air storage. This is again sweetness during storage. Looking at the difference between harvest time, we didn't find any statistical difference between sweetness, whether they were harvested early, mid or late. So you get a difference in firmness, but not in sweetness. This is the TSS to TA ratio. I can't explain the dip in the late ones after 12 weeks. That's just something that happens during research. But you'll see that the late harvested ones have a higher TSS to TA, mainly due to high sugar, but also a low acidity. So if you want very sweet fruit, and you don't mind marketing them quite early, in other words, within, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks from harvest, late harvested fruit are fine. This is just an indication of some of the other quality areas we looked at. This is juiciness, where we spin a bit of the, about a gram of flesh, work out how much juice was in there as a percent. You'll see that the mid-harvested fruit were a little bit juicier than the other two, but there's no real difference between harvest time and juiciness. Now, one of the, I would say, the biggest problem that we found in all three varieties was on Lanya, and it's scald. And you'll see that the photograph on your left, that's mild scald, that's relatively common. The photograph on your right, that's heavy scald. We only saw that in 2015, but it can happen again in air. This is just some quick data we got from a couple of trials that we did. When does scald, when is it first seen? In 2015, we first saw it after 24 weeks. The pre-OC and post refer to early, mid and late harvests. So there wasn't really a difference between harvest, but there was in atmosphere. You would see scald first of all in air, but 4 weeks later you'd see it in CA, so you saw it in both. Interestingly enough, we did a large scale trial on 118 scald this year. We saw no scald. So it's seasonal like all scald. The quality of the Lanya this year was exceptionally good. We tried, again, a small trial to see whether MCP had an effect on scald. The recommended doses, as I was told by Smart Fresh for pears, is 300 parts per billion. You could see that it knocked out any scald symptoms at 20 weeks, but the scald came back with a vengeance at 24, particularly at 28. It was like it was holding it back, and then it just wore off, and the scald just went whoop. So it can have an effect. But, sorry, the one thing I will point out here is you will not see scald in Lanya until about 20 weeks. The earliest I've seen it is 16 to 18. So make a decision about when do you want to market this fruit, and is it really necessary to treat with MCP if you don't want to store it for 20 weeks. You won't see scald. So just quickly, what we found with Lanya was that it loses firmness by about 10% over 20 weeks at 0.5, regardless of atmosphere. Early harvests tend to soften more. The sweetness increased by 4 to 5% in the first 16 weeks in CA, and there's no effective harvest time. So if you want to maximise your sweetness, it needs to be stored for around about 16 weeks under CA. We just mentioned scald. You won't see it before 20 weeks. If you're very unlucky, it's a bad year, you'll see it at 16. If you and we've already discussed whether you need MCP. It depends when you want to market it. CA resulted in very much better quality fruit after 7 days at 18 degrees, so I would strongly recommend we go with CA storage rather than air. And we've stored Lanya for, and I can update this slide because I've just done the stats on this year. We've stored it for 24 weeks. Got very good results this year. The quality of the fruit was very good when it went in, so the quality was better when it came out. But and unfortunately a colleague of mine was going to bring some fruit up so that you could see it, but he couldn't make it due to illness. But we pulled fruit out a couple of weeks ago and it was as good as gold. So it can store very well. Now moving on to 0131 Deliza. This is a different kettle of fish in that, as far as I'm concerned, Deliza's a cricket ball. You know anything to it, you can store it as long as you want. It comes out looking terrific. Again, it didn't produce ethylene either before or after harvest, so you can use the DA as an indication, but we can't set harvest classes. What that means is that you will still need to do the old school firmness testing. We found that Deliza is a later pick. This year we harvested, for example, or the last week in March, I wanted to harvest them late to see what would happen, and I'll tell you what happened later on. But they'll crop around about the same time as Packhams, but at a higher firmness, around about 5, 5.2, 5.3 is fine. Just quickly again, whether they're in air or CA, they lose firmness, but there's not a real difference, even though you'll see at 16 and 20 weeks the air look like they're a bit firmer. That's statistically not significant. I didn't put in a graph about the 3 harvest times because they're all pretty much the same. Sweetness. The 2 things to note from this slide is there's no difference between air and CA as to how sweet they get in Deliza, but look how much they put on. The sweetness rockets along up until 24 weeks. So putting them in storage reduces mealiness and makes them much sweeter, this particular variety. And here's a graph of whether there's any difference as far as harvest time goes. There's not. They all go up very nicely. This is the TSS to TA. You'll see late season pick, much sweeter, a better taste because they are sweeter. And the TA is quite low. This is juice. There's no real difference between harvest time as far as juiciness goes. As far as the storage summary goes, they lose about 9% in firmness over 28 weeks. A couple of years ago we went through to 36 weeks and we got about the same result, and they were still good. We could have kept going, but we ran out of fruit. Again, sweetness increased, but this time by up to 10% in the first 20 weeks of storage, and then stabilises. So the longer you store them, the sweeter they become. No disorders. The only disorders that we have observed with Deliza is rots, and we had a bad year this year. I think mainly because we had an attack of piercing insects, and then we harvested mid to late March, and it was a very high brown rot risk period. It was very, very wet, rained all day, and high humidity. Despite the fact that we dipped in Scholar before they went into storage, and we did that with all our fruit, we found quite a lot and up to 40% of the fruit were badly affected by rots. But it does store very well, 8 to 10 months at least, providing it's picked fairly firm, so 4.7 to 5, around about 5, I think, kg is an ideal harvest time for Deliza. Now, this is the 0534. The variety has not been released yet. Some of you might be aware of it. It's a very interesting fruit, very yellow background colour after it's ripened, but when you pick it, the background colour is green. Again, we did not find any ethylene produced by this fruit, so you can't use the DA meter alone. We also found with this particular variety a very poor correlation between firmness in kilograms and DA because of this change in background colour. Basically what happens is that when you pick it, it's very dark green with a red blush, but even after 4 weeks of storage, about 30-40% of the fruit were going yellow. So if you're only going to store them for a short period of time, you get quite a variable outturn based on colour. But just have a look at the firmness. They're a very firm, crisp fruit. We could have waited and waited and waited for these things to soften on the tree, but they didn't. So we recommend that you harvest them at around about 7. This is, and I haven't put the dot point, this is about the same time as Deliza. You'll see that they do soften during storage. Doesn't matter whether they're in air or CA. And this is the most interesting thing. Look at the increase in sweetness over the first 8 weeks of storage. They really rocket up from 14 to just under 17. Again, this is another fruit that's very sweet. I've seen it at 20 bricks. You do not get a difference in the increase in sweetness due to atmosphere. This is TSS to TA. Again, the late harvested fruit are a little bit sweeter. They have a lower TA at harvest, so that they tend to score a bit higher. This sort of graph, when I look at it, I think, well, you should really be harvesting mid to late fruit. I don't think that the early is any good. Just another summary. They lose between 16 and 20% in firmness over 28 weeks, but there's no effective harvest stage. The sweetness increases by up to 20% in the first 8 weeks. So this is a fruit. If you pick it straight from the tree and try and eat it, it's quite flowery. It's got a starchy taste to it, but even after 4 weeks at 0.5, it sweetens up beautifully. We have not observed any disorders, but the background colour can be a bit of a problem in the first 4 to 8 weeks of storage, because you'll get fruit that will come out that have a green background colour, and you'll get fruit that come out right next to them, same room, same tub, and they're yellow. So it depends. There's some marketing that needs to be done. What do the public want? There might also be a case, we found after 8 weeks you didn't get this variability in background colour because they all came out yellow, so maybe we just store them for 8 weeks and they all come out looking the same. Now this is, I'm just going to finish off here stealing a bit of Bruce's thunder. Bruce Tompkins is coming in November to give a more in-depth talk about consumer preference studies we've done with these pears in Indonesia and Thailand. We did these last year. We did them with a commercial market research company called Coleman Brunton that have offices right throughout Asia, and they're very professional at running these trials. What we did is we got 150 urban consumers who regularly buy Western fruit, put them in a room, and we gave them Deliza hard, which is Del H, Deliza soft, Lanya hard, Lanya soft. We asked them a whole series of questions. Bruce will have all the details about what we found, but this is just an indicator of how they preferred their fruit. And the question was, would you definitely not, probably not buy this fruit? Are you unsure about whether you buy this fruit? And the bars I want you to look at are the clear and the black. Probably would and definitely would buy this fruit. And you can see that in both cases, Del H, which is hard, crisp, was preferred over soft by a little bit, by about 5%. Lanya is in general terms preferred over Deliza, and the hard, again the crisp fruit, was preferred over the soft. Now the fruit that we presented them had been stored for more than 12 weeks, so it had reached its maximum sweetness and it was in good, very good condition. This is Bangkok, and I put this in because it shows that there are quite significant differences between countries about what they prefer. In this particular case, you'll see the bottom one, Lanya Soft, Thais did not like that at all, which was an interesting result. But as far as Deliza is concerned, they pretty much liked them whether they were hard or soft. I should say the hard were around about 4 to 4.5, the soft were about 1.5 to 2 kilograms. So they were about twice as soft. So they were quite happy with Deliza, whether it was hard or soft, and they actually preferred Deliza to Lanya, which was a little bit different from Thailand. So Bruce will be talking about more about this in November. The reason I put it in is because we know from work that APAL did, I think about 2016 with Sweeney, that Deliza and Lanya are will be, we hope, fairly popular with Australian consumers. We've done the studies there. We thought, well, why don't we have a look at what's going to happen in Asia? And we were advised by APAL that the top 2 possible export destinations for this fruit are Indonesia and Thailand, and we found that yes, they very much preferred them, and they would pay a fairly good price for them, but Bruce will go into that. So again, all right, we'll just finish up with this one. This is a direct comparison between Lanya 0118 and Packham's and Deliza 0131 and Packham's in Indonesia and Thailand, and you can see both were very much preferred, particularly, as I just mentioned, the Deliza in Thailand. 78% said they would buy that over and above Packham's, even at a premium 25%. So there's a market there. So in conclusions, we found these 3 varieties stored very well, as you would expect with pears. The only downside is with Lanya is that you may need MCP if you want to market them after, let's say, 6 months of storage. If you want to market them direct, straight out, I don't think you'll need it. They're well liked in Jakarta and Bangkok as a crisp pear, and they market well after 6 to 8 weeks cooling to maximise sweetness. With Deliza 0131, we store them up to 10 months. I believe you can store them for longer than that, and we had no problems. As long as you've got rots under control before they go in, they'll go a very, very long time. Deliza, as far as I'm concerned, would be a 12-month market. I think Lanya would be a seasonal market. You're going to have a short period of time where you can get the fruit out in top quality before it shows problems, whether they be rots or scald. But Deliza will go forever. It's also well liked in Jakarta and Bangkok, and you can market all year after about 6 to 8 weeks of cool storage in CA to maximise sweetness.